With economic disruption around the globe, suppliers in all industries are seeking creative and dynamic solutions for the unknowns ahead. We begin by breaking our updated strategy into 3 phases: react, recover, and reinvent. First off, we need to understand where we stand with our existing commitments. Before responding to any new RFQs, how have canceled or reduced orders, our reduced workforce, and so on impacted our operations and our available capacity? To evaluate, we can update our digital factories to reflect these changes and leverage the data generated in aPriori to understand the current state of the business and how we proceed from a sales and operations perspective. We can employ aPriori's Cost Insight Report to review our current obligations relative to available machine capacity at each of our facilities. Within Cost Insight Report, we can choose from a library of available reports or graphs and select our capacity analysis. This chart overlays our current sold capacity relative to available machine capacity, and we can see a few high poles in the tent, the first of which being our casting foundry, and the second being our 3-axis lathe. We can share this information with our sales personnel to prioritize RFQ replies. Understanding our internal operations, we recognize that some of our current processes may have been committed based on capacity available at the time of contract. So next, we'd like to reevaluate some of the existing contracts to optimize the process routing for the most cost-effective manufacturing process. In the case of our recently won brake rotor bid, we seek to identify if such opportunities exist. We can do so by checking the manufacturing process routing. Our current production, we run this component on a 2-axis lathe and a 3-axis mill based on available capacity at the time of quoting. After our previous analysis identifies the opportunity for capacity on our 3-axis lathe, we see that there's a 40-cent piece cost save and an opportunity to reduce our internal costs. We can notify our manufacturing personnel of the available capacity on the 3-axis lathe and advise them on the necessary changes to achieve the desired cost savings. While undergoing the optimization exercise, we may have found contracts worthy of renegotiating. We can revisit Cost Insight Reporting to review our profit margins per product or per contract. Back in Cost Insight Reporting, we can go to our profit analysis. Here, we can overlay the cost quoted to customer versus our internal cost and plot the profit margin. Additionally, we may find ourselves having to defend our current contracts for those customers requesting cost reductions on their existing contracts. Given the added costs of our updated operating conditions, we can see many of our profit margins have dipped, some even approaching zero. Let's take a look at this housing casting. Let's imagine this customer has come to us and requested a cost decrease. Here we can review the current quoted cost relative to our internal costs and export a detailed piece cost report. Select the node from the graph, and we find ourselves a detailed report. We can highlight to the customer, line item by line item, our exact process routing, the associated labor and cycle times for each step within the process, and the associated costs, thus rolling up into our finished fully burdened cost. Providing this level of detail and transparency will give your customers confidence that they're paying the right price. In addition to the detailed breakdown from the previous exercise, we may want to provide customers and prospects with a variety of quotes covering the potential variation as we recover to full staff and operations. We can do this in aPriori's Cost Insight design by comparing half, 3/4, and full staff scenarios. With the 3 scenarios aligned side by side, we can scroll through and see how each line item is impacted by the varying operations. With each of these tasks complete, we now have a full understanding of our current obligations and how to proceed with operations optimally. We can provide this detail to sales and to the shop floor with forecast and priorities. Next, with a solid understanding of the current state of the business, we seek to improve our bid process in an effort to gain first-in advantage. This so happens to align with an influx in RFQs due to local OEMs onshoring. We begin by analyzing all inbound RFQs in our factory's digital twin. To do so, we send the CAD model associated with each RFQ into aPriori's Cost Insight design. We populate our process group, our digital factory, annual volume, and the material. After running our manufacturing and cost simulation, we can see details of the process routing and all of the associated costs. With our cost and manufacturing simulations complete, we next look to identify which bid package is most lucrative based on capacity and profitability. In the previous exercise, we evaluated our current capacity constraints. We can export the details of each scenario within the bid package and evaluate relative to our available capacity and our outlook on profitability. In our previous exercise, we recognized that we have excess capacity on our 3-axis mills, while we lack capacity on our 4-axis mill. This would lead us to prioritize the new brake rotor bid and the spring cage die casting, with more analysis to come on the machine housing. Next, for the components or bid packages that we are unable to manufacture internally, we look to evaluate the remaining items for outsource opportunities, and we can do this by running scenarios in the digital factories of our suppliers and affiliates. To evaluate the machined housing for outsource, we revisit Cost Insight Design and save a new scenario, naming it TexCast Outsourced. With our new scenario saved, we can update our digital factory to that of Houston Casting Co., a local friendly supplier, and recost the simulation using the parameters of their digital factory. After simulating the manufacturing at Houston Casting Co., we can create a new comparison and compare the TexCast make versus the TexCast outsourced scenarios. We can compare the fully burdened cost of both scenarios to see that outsourcing actually results in a decrease in component costs by over $2, making this very viable as an outsource candidate and potentially even giving us advantage over our competitors by decreasing our bid cost, while leaving plenty of room for our own margin. With our costing simulations complete, we can export detailed reports to provide to Houston Casting Co. and share the component sourcing report with a high level of detail on the process routing and each of the associated costs. And upon their acceptance of the bid, we can add the necessary margins and provide this level of detail back to the customer as well. After completing the overhaul of our bid process, we next move on to the Reinvent phase, where we look to improve collaboration both internally and externally. To begin, we'll identify any inbound RFQ packages that have optimization opportunities for both manufacturability and cost. We recall from our initial investigation of the spring cage, there were some design guidance issues flagged by aPriori, so we revisit Cost Insight Design to evaluate the design guidance. Cost Insight Design has flagged a handful of draft issues, as well as a handful of hole proximity issues. And we can see with respect to each of the holes, the current proximity to the trim edge is 1.02 millimeters, where the suggested spacing should be greater than 2.15. This could result in poor part quality or the need for secondary operations, adding additional cost. Next, we'll send our file back to the CAD software, communicate the opportunities with the prospect without compromising design. With the file open in the CAD software, we can address the proximity issues as well as the draft angle concerns. We begin by modifying our flange diameter to improve the spacing between the holes in the flange. Address our remaining draft concerns, and send the file back to Cost Insight Design. Within Cost Insight, we can compare the two scenarios. We can see we were able to eliminate 42% of the design guidance issues just by making those few small changes, all while remaining relatively cost neutral or even seeing nearly a 1% reduction in piece cost. This can be communicated back to the customer as an opportunity for cost reduction and improves our value proposition to our client base. Adopting and improving these processes will enable us to better collaborate with key customers on design to cost. We can leverage aPriori's reporting tools to improve credibility and shorten the bid process by providing a great amount of detail to both internal and external stakeholders. And all of this can be done within a secure cloud environment. By employing these practices, we can improve our ability to react to an ever-changing global environment, recover from adversity, and reinvent ourselves to add more value to both our customers and our supply chain.